If you ask any long-standing Battlefield fan or player what their favourite Battlefield game was, I guarantee a significant amount of them will say Bad Company 2. But why? Why is this game bestowed the title of legendary in the franchise? What makes it so special, and why do people remember it so fondly? Well, that's what we're going to be diving into in today's video. Battlefield for many years was a PC dominated franchise. It was the game you played on PC if you wanted large scale warfare with your friends, back in the days when console gaming just wasn't as popular or as widely available as it is now. Up until of course June of 2008, when the original Bad Company released and started life as a console-only Battlefield game. What was this madness? An experiment by DICE and EA? A wise choice? A mistake? Who knows? Even still, you could tell that it was a console game. The soldier movement was definitely a result of the game being made for the sticks, most notably by the inability to strafe. Not as much of a problem on consoles, but definitely a hindrance on PC. Some people don't class the original Bad Company game as a main Battlefield title, a bit of a spin-off, but it actually brought with it a lot of new features to the Battlefield franchise, some that are now firm pillars of each game. The most notable of these new features was destruction, making things go bye-bye in a live multiplayer game, blowing holes in walls that snipers were using for cover, levelling buildings. It was glorious by all accounts. And the original Bad Company game was the debut of the Frostbite Engine, the engine that we're now all too familiar with as the powerful force behind the latest Battlefield games. Back then it was in its first iteration, and when Bad Company 2 released it was improved upon even more. What this updated engine brought to the table though was its ability to create even more destructible environments that simply wasn't possible before. Now, anyone that's played Bad Company 2 will remember how incredible the destruction was in multiplayer games. The ability to just whack a grenade launcher under your gun and go to town was amazing. And the map that probably showed it off best for me was Arica Harbour. The middle part of the map had buildings on each side of the road when the map began, but depending on how many tickets the server had, by the time you were halfway through the rounds, all of the buildings were pretty much destroyed. It was very impressive at the time, and players enjoyed blowing holes in buildings just for the sake of it. But looking back, was it the best thing for level design? Probably not, in my opinion, because Battlefield has now moved away from full-scale destruction for the most part. Destruction is of course still a huge part of modern Battlefield games, but recently DICE have tried to ensure that there is always a certain amount of cover available to players, even when all of the destructible buildings are destroyed. When you play BF1 for example, not all of the buildings can be blown up. When it comes to BF5, a different approach has been taken with fortifications, but still not everything can be levelled in BF5. That being said, I will always fondly remember Bad Company 2 for all of the destruction. It was pretty amazing at the time, there was nothing else like it. And still, when you go back and play it, there's just something so damn satisfying about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. Now, another strong point that Bad Company 2 had going for it was its maps. I'd say the game has a lot of very memorable maps, including Arica Harbour that we talked about. How about Golden Oasis, Port Valdez, Laguna Alta, the list goes on. I'm not saying that all of the maps were perfect, but a lot of them were very good. The game had really good DLC maps too, something that can't always be said for recent Battlefield games. And I feel like one of the main reasons the maps were good was somewhat down to the game modes played on them. Rush, for example, was one of the main game modes of Bad Company 2, and for good reason. It just worked really well on the maps. Rush was first introduced with the original Bad Company. It was called Gold Rush back then, but it was shortened to just Rush for the second game. Due to the weapon design, the map design, Rush just seemed to work extremely well on Bad Company 2. And this was definitely helped by the lower player count, which we will get onto in a second, but Rush has struggled to remain popular in subsequent Battlefield games, and it never really had the same excellent balance as it did back in Bad Company 2. It's possible though that some of this is just nostalgia talking, thinking with rose-tinted glasses that it worked really well and there were no problems. Of course that wasn't the case, but Rush was a mode that was a genuine contender to conquest back then, and that isn't the case anymore. anymore. I do remember a couple of issues with Rush though. If you knew where to sit with the tank, you could hold at your spawn and just repeatedly fire at the building or the Rush container, and eventually it would be destroyed, and that was a really cheesy way of completing the objective. There were other ways that you could do it too that weren't quite as intended. Balance issues aside though, Rush was 99% an excellent experience back in BC2. Now we mentioned it just now, but the player count in Bad Company was not the 64 player warfare that we're used to in typical Battlefield games. The max player count was 32, and while that might not suit everyone, it worked well, especially when it came to Rush. And that's one of the reasons that it worked out so well too. It wasn't as much as a cluster bomb with grenades going off left, right and centre. It has to be said that the gunplay in BC2 was very satisfying as well, especially the sniping. Classes were a little different to how they are now though. You had assault with assault rifles, grenade launchers and ammo. The medic class had healing as well as light machine guns, kind of weird. Recon of course had the long range snipers, motion sensors and C4, whereas the engineer class had some machine guns, the repair tool and anti-tank launchers. I remember using the AEK a lot as assault as well as the M416, and the GOL was very satisfying to use as recon. The interesting thing about playing as a recon in Bad Company 2 is that for a start, there is no sniper sway, that's just not a thing. There also isn't anywhere near as much bullet drop as there is in the current Battlefield games. So for the most part, sniping was very straightforward and accessible for all players, but despite that, good players could definitely stand out. Headshots were important of course. Now there was a crazy amount of weapons in the game, and whenever you hit the spawn screen, you were faced with a lot of customization options for your character to change up the way that you'd play. You could choose to have more armor protection or be more lightweight, perhaps have a red dot, or sacrifice that for something else and use iron sights. It wasn't entirely dependent on each weapon, but it did offer up some variants for playstyles. The game was also pretty analog for the most part. For instance, there were no lock-on weapons to take down helicopters as far as I remember. You very much had to land a skill-based shot, and while that's still a thing in BF3 and BF4, there are a lot of lock-on gadgets too. If I recall, there was a tracking dart that you could shoot, and if you landed that on a helicopter or even a player, you could use a certain rocket launcher to lock onto them, and that used to be extremely funny. Let's not mention the shotguns though. I think we can all remember how strong they were. Sometimes it felt like a shotgun with slug shells were just mini sniper rifles. Of course, it wasn't all about multiplayer either when it comes to Bad Company 2. Battlefield was and still isn't very well known for its single player. Let's be honest, even though single player is now a big portion of all Battlefield games, it's not why the majority of players buy and play the game. It's all about the multiplayer experience. With Bad Company 1 and 2 though, they felt that they had the ability to go down a far less serious route, and it really worked out. During the campaigns, you join up with B Company, otherwise known as Bad Company. There's some absolutely fantastic writing and story moments, and the campaign doesn't take itself too seriously because of the light tone and humour, and it worked really well in both games. And we have to mention the extra content too, including full DLCs. First up, they were all free. New game modes or the addition of current game modes to different maps and new maps themselves were all free back then. Premium wasn't a thing. There was a VIP system, but that was a code that you got when you purchased the game that granted you future content for free. It was a way to try and prevent people from buying second-hand versions of the game, they said, because it would then of course come without the code needed for the free content. There were certain expansions that you had to pay for though. I'm sure a lot of players remember the original Battlefield Vietnam game. Well, for Bad Company 2 they did it again. It included 4 maps based on the Vietnam War, as well as around 15 weapons, 6 vehicles. It was a pretty big expansion, and that was something that you did have to pay for. It's kind of strange how we've come full circle though. After Bad Company 2, BF3 released and we started to go down the premium route, and now we're coming full circle back to free content post-release. And one more thing, it was and still is on Steam. Origin is fine, don't get me wrong, but Steam is just a better system when you've got most of your friends playing there on PC. Everyone tends to have Steam, it's just far more convenient to have it on there, and of course at the time Origin wasn't a thing. But even now, when you load up the game through Steam and you want to join a friend, it just works instantly. Origin and the Battlefield games since BF3 I think have really gone downhill in terms of parties and squad systems, so I'm hoping that they can improve that for BF5. Overall, Bad Company 2 will always be a fan favourite. Because of the setting of the game, the destruction, the gunplay combined with the humour and the single player, it's a game that players will always adore. In fact, a significant amount of players have wished and wanted a Bad Company 3 for a long time. But what would that game, a modern Bad Company 3, look like today, I wonder? Would it try to stick more to the gameplay mechanics of Bad Company 2, or would it lean more towards the more recent Battlefield games and be more hardcore and realistic? How would it be set apart now to make it feel Bad Company-ish, if you know what I mean? But I'll tell you what, when I've played Battlefield 5, honestly I do get a bit of a Bad Company vibe at times. Maybe that's just me. Perhaps it's because the weapons need a bit more skill, maybe it was just the aesthetic of the beta map. Who knows, but either way, players will go crazy if DICE ever announce a Bad Company 3. Maybe I should do a video on what I think that game will look like. And that's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed the video, leave me a like down in the comments below. If you didn't like it, a dislike, let me know what your favourite part of Bad Company 1 or Bad Company 2 was. Subscribe if you want to see more like this, and I'll see you in the next one.